George Patton stood over a map of Sicily with a cigar clenched in his teeth. Omar Bradley had just walked into 7th Army headquarters expecting an update on the invasion. He got something else instead. Patton told him a new directive had come down from Army Group. Montgomery was getting the main road toward Messina, the road running through Vicini and Caltagirone, so his 8th Army could swing around Mount Etna and drive straight for the city. Bradley's 45th Division would have to move out of the way and slide west to make room. Bradley couldn't believe what he was hearing. He said Patton couldn't allow this to happen. Patton didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at the map, at the single good road running toward the only prize that actually mattered, now reserved for somebody else's army. 2 armies had landed on the same island 9 days earlier. They had crossed the same beaches under the same fire, and buried men from both nations in the same soil. Only one of them had just been handed the path to glory. The other had been handed the leftovers and told to be grateful for them. On July 10, 1943, the largest amphibious invasion force assembled to that point in the war hit the beaches of Sicily. British 8th Army, under Bernard Montgomery, landed on the southeastern coast, aiming north toward Messina and the strait beyond it. American 7th Army, under George Patton, landed further west. General Harold Alexander, commanding the ground campaign for the Allies, had already decided what came next. Montgomery would drive along the coast road, swing around the base of Mount Etna, and take the port city that controlled every ship and soldier trying to cross to the Italian mainland. Patton's 7th Army existed in Alexander's plan, mainly to protect Montgomery's flank, guard the supply lines, absorb whatever pressure came from the west, and stay out of the way of the real objective. The National World War II Museum later described the entire arrangement plainly. This was a horse race in which American military prestige was on the line, and American prestige had been assigned a seat in the stands. Patton had commanded the amphibious landings at Casablanca less than a year earlier. He had spent months rebuilding his reputation and his army's confidence after the disaster at Kasserine Pass, where American forces had broken and run in their first real test against German armor. Sicily was supposed to be proof that lesson had been learned. Instead, the plan handed down from Army Group treated 7th Army like it still needed supervision, not like an army that had earned the right to fight for the objective itself. Now he was being told to babysit someone else's advance, while the actual trophy went to a general who didn't even command his troops. He wasn't going to accept that quietly, and everyone who knew him understood it. Montgomery's 8th Army hit a wall almost immediately. German paratroopers and Italian coastal divisions dug in around Catania at the base of Mount Etna and refused to give ground. The coastal route Montgomery had been counting on turned into one of the toughest fights of the entire campaign. Instead of adjusting his ambitions to match the resistance, Montgomery adjusted the map instead. He convinced Alexander to give him a second road as well, the inland route through Vicini and Caltagirone that ran directly through ground the Americans had already been assigned. That was the order Patton read inside his own headquarters tent. Bradley's division would have to clear out entirely and find somewhere else to fight. 2 roads leading toward the only city that mattered, and one army now held both of them. Montgomery hadn't just claimed the prize for himself. He'd claimed the only route to it, then taken the backup route as well, leaving the Americans to scramble for whatever scraps of ground were left. Patton's own staff expected him to fume in private and comply in public. That had become the pattern everyone had learned to expect from Allied Coalition Command by the summer of 1943, where British seniority in the theater usually settled arguments before they started. The senior partner made the call, and the junior partner adjusted his plans accordingly. This time, Patton didn't adjust anything, and he didn't wait for permission to say so. He picked up the phone and asked for a plane to Tunisia. Patton didn't send a memo through channels. He got on a plane and flew there himself. In late July, he arrived at Alexander's headquarters in Tunisia to make his case in person, Army commander to Army group commander, face-to-face with no aides softening the message. This was not standard procedure for a subordinate general with a grievance. Patton was arguing against the entire logic of the plan Alexander had already approved. He said giving Montgomery both roads made no strategic sense whatsoever. If German defenders were dug in around Etna, feeding more divisions into that same bottleneck wouldn't break the line any faster. It would simply mean more Allied casualties funneled into the same killing ground for no additional gain. The answer was to let the Americans drive north through the island's mountainous center, split the retreating Axis forces in two, and threaten Messina from a direction nobody in German command was watching. Alexander's staff had largely dismissed the interior route as impassable for a modern mechanized army, full of narrow mountain roads better suited to mule trains than tank columns. Alexander listened to the argument and weighed the risk against the potential gain. He agreed to redraw the boundary between the two armies. Patton's 7th Army could push north to the coast near Palermo, then turn east toward Messina along its own line of advance. It wasn't the direct road Montgomery still controlled, and it wasn't the shorter route by any measure, but it was no longer nothing. And Patton flew back to Sicily with something he hadn't possessed a week earlier: room to run and a reason to run fast. Patton's forces reached the outskirts of Palermo on July 22nd. He let his corps' commander, Jeffrey Keyes, lead the way into the city first, then followed behind to streets full of cheering crowds shouting for the fall of Mussolini. He set up his headquarters inside the royal palace, sleeping in rooms that had housed Sicilian nobility for centuries. Palermo was a genuine victory by any measure, a major port city taken quickly and with remarkably few casualties. But Patton understood exactly what it was, and just as clearly what it wasn't. Palermo was the consolation prize, the city Alexander had offered him, instead of the one that actually decided the campaign. Messina was still the true objective, and Messina was still, on paper, Montgomery's alone to take. The next day, Bradley's II Corps reached the northern coastline near the town of Termini. Patton didn't pause to enjoy the moment or savor the headlines. He immediately ordered Bradley to turn his men east, toward Messina, toward a city the original plan had never intended American soldiers to reach at all. Every mile east was a mile closer to a prize he'd been told wasn't his to claim. He intended to claim it anyway, whatever Alexander's map said. While Patton's men turned east along the coast, Montgomery's 8th Army was going nowhere fast. German paratroopers and panzer grenadiers had turned the approaches to Catania and the slopes of Etna into a killing ground of minefields and ambushes. Canadian and British units attempted a wide flanking maneuver around Etna's western side, hoping to unhinge the German defense from another angle. It cost them precious days they didn't have to spare. Weeks into the campaign, the general who had personally claimed both roads to Messina was now further from the city than the army that had been told to guard his flank. On July 25th, word reached Sicily that King Victor Emmanuel III had stripped Mussolini of power back in Rome. Italy was beginning to collapse from within. German commanders, watching their ally fall apart, started quietly planning a full withdrawal of their own forces off the island, an evacuation across the Strait of Messina that would eventually save the overwhelming majority of Axis manpower from capture entirely. The clock wasn't just ticking on which general reached the city first anymore. It was ticking on whether either army would trap anything worth trapping once they finally got there. Montgomery's 8th Army still held the shorter distance and the better roads on paper. What it no longer had 3 weeks in was momentum, And momentum was the one thing Patton's entire style of command was built around. Allied intelligence officers watching the stalemate at Catania grew increasingly frustrated with how slowly the advance was unfolding. Every day the Germans held the line around Etna was another day their comrades further west had to prepare an orderly withdrawal instead of a desperate rout. On July 25th, the same day Mussolini fell from power, Montgomery met with Patton to discuss the state of the stalled campaign. What he proposed next surprised nearly everyone who heard about it afterward. Montgomery suggested the Americans push on toward Messina themselves in direct competition with his own stalled Eighth Army. He sent word to Patton's headquarters, framing the whole thing almost as sport, urging Patton to use his best efforts to help make a proper race of it. Montgomery didn't believe there was much risk in the gesture. His Eighth Army still held the shorter, more direct route into the city, even with the delays at Etna factored in. He assumed his own advance would resume the moment the bottleneck finally broke, arriving well ahead of any American column fighting its way along unfamiliar terrain on the northern coast road. Patton read the message very differently than Montgomery had intended it. He didn't hear a friendly invitation to a gentleman's contest between allies. He heard a British commander who had tried to shut him out of the entire campaign 3 weeks earlier, now offering a race he assumed the Americans couldn't possibly win. Patton had no intention of losing that bet. None of his staff needed to be told twice what came next. The northern coast road toward Messina was brutal terrain for any army to fight through. Steep cliffs dropped straight into the sea on one side, and German engineers had blown every bridge and culvert behind them as they withdrew. Patton's engineers had to rebuild the road piece by piece as the army advanced, sometimes working through the night just to move a single truck convoy forward another mile. He pushed his troops well past the point of normal exhaustion, driving the 7th Army at a pace that alarmed even his own staff officers. To break the worst of the bottlenecks, Bradley proposed something unconventional for the campaign. Small amphibious hops along the coastline, landing infantry behind German rearguard positions directly from the sea, then linking back up with the main column to keep the advance moving forward. It worked, but only barely, and it cost lives that a slower, more methodical advance might have spared. German rearguards fought stubbornly at every defensible ridge and river crossing, forcing Patton's infantry to clear positions the hard way, one hillside at a time, often at night. Patton didn't particularly care about methodical. He cared about exactly one thing, and every officer under his command understood precisely what that was by now. Every single day mattered to him. Every hour mattered even more, and he made sure his commanders felt that pressure personally, sometimes showing up at forward positions himself to demand faster progress. By the first week of August, both armies were finally closing on Messina from 2 different directions at once. Montgomery's 8th Army had broken through the German defenses at Catania at last, but the delay had already cost them nearly 3 full weeks of momentum. Patton's 7th Army, fighting along a coastline that was never supposed to be his route in the first place, was closing the gap fast and showing no signs of slowing. German and Italian forces were now in open withdrawal across the island, ferrying men, guns, and vehicles across the strait toward the Italian mainland, as quickly as their transports allowed. German commanders had quietly organized a full evacuation plan, ferrying men and vehicles across the strait by night using barges, ferries, and anything else that would float. Tens of thousands of soldiers were escaping under cover of darkness, even as both Allied armies pushed harder than at any other point in the campaign. The 2 generals racing toward Messina were, in a very real sense, racing each other toward an empty room. Patton did not slow down long enough to consider that irony. He drove 7th Army forward with the same intensity he had shown since the day Bradley first walked into his tent with news of a stolen road. His staff later said he seemed to treat every single mile of delay as a personal insult that needed correcting immediately. By August 16th, advance elements of 7th Army were within striking distance of the city itself. Montgomery's 8th Army was still grinding its way up from the south, still fighting through the terrain his own boundary decisions had helped create. Patton could see the finish line from where he stood. Montgomery could not see it yet at all. On the morning of August 17th, 1943, lead elements of George Patton's 7th Army rolled into Messina. There was no British column waiting at the gates, and there was no dramatic confrontation between rival commanders in the town square. Montgomery's 8th Army was still several hours behind, working its way up from the south along the very route it had fought so hard 3 weeks earlier to keep entirely for itself. Patton had won the race that Montgomery himself had invited him to run, certain there was nothing to lose by offering it. He had done it starting from a position that was never supposed to reach the city at all, on a road nobody had wanted to give him. Word reached 8th Army headquarters that the Americans had already secured the objective. A British officer, Brigadier J.C. Curry, met Patton's advancing forces and offered his personal congratulations on behalf of the 8th Army. He told Patton it had been a jolly good race and meant it as a compliment between professional soldiers. Bernard Montgomery was not there to say anything of the kind himself. Montgomery never personally arrived in Messina to acknowledge how the campaign he had tried so hard to keep for himself had actually ended. There was no handshake between the two rivals at the finish line and no photograph of a smug victor greeting a gracious runner-up. That image exists only in the 1970 film that dramatized Patton's career for American audiences, and military historians have spent decades correcting the record ever since. Major General Michael Reynolds later wrote plainly that the film gave a completely false version of events. The real story was quieter than Hollywood's version, and in its own way considerably more damning for Montgomery. He had spent the first 3 weeks of the campaign maneuvering to keep Patton off the main roads to Messina entirely. He had claimed both direct routes to the objective for his own army alone. He had then invited Patton into a race he was confident he would win without needing to try particularly hard for it. Instead, the general he had tried to sideline reached the objective first, using a road Montgomery himself had never intended to leave open to anyone. Much of the German and Italian garrison escaped across the strait, regardless of who arrived first. Whatever the two commanders had actually been racing toward, it wasn't waiting there when either of them finally showed up. Montgomery had built the racetrack with his own hands. He simply wasn't standing at the finish line to see who crossed it. Sicily fell after 38 days of fighting at a cost of roughly 25,000 Allied casualties on both sides combined. Patton got his headlines, his photograph in Palermo's royal palace, and a reputation restored after the chaos of Kasserine Pass months earlier. Montgomery got a campaign that ran 3 weeks longer than planned, along a road he had fought hard to keep entirely for himself. The bigger failure belonged to both of them equally. While two Allied generals competed over a finish line, tens of thousands of German and Italian troops slipped safely across the Strait of Messina and lived to fight the Allies again in Italy. The race made for one hell of a story. It was never supposed to be the point.